Welcome back to the Road to Great Health podcast, where we discuss natural solutions to today's worst health problems. And we got a good one for you today. I'm Dr. Kevin Linderman from South Louisiana, and I am joined by Dr. Rob DeMartino out of the great Las Vegas, Nevada.
80 degrees here today. Loving it.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's nice here today, too. And I see in the background you're back in your office.
Finally. I know, it only took forever, but we got it all done.
Well, man, Doc, we have such an important topic today that I don't think people really understand. So the topic for today is biotoxic load. And it is very common for Dr. Rob and I to see a patient with chronic disease or chronic conditions, and we find one of the major misunderstood or unlooked at factors is that they have a very high biotoxic load. So, Doc, how would you define biotoxic load?
So biotoxic load is going to basically be an inflammatory reaction that will happen when there's the presence of certain types of infections inside the body. So the most common one that almost everybody knows is Lyme disease. Right, yeah. So Lyme disease will create a biotoxic load, but the other big one that we run into all the time, even here in dry climate, is mold.
Yeah.
And it's a relatively new thing. You know, people have been around mold. Mold won't make you sick. Doctors would say that for a long period of time. If you get around mold exposure for any length of period of time, you will get pretty darn sick. And it's not uncommon for us to find that. And then we have patients go search for it. And then sure enough, it's somewhere in their near environment.
Yeah. So bio, meaning it was once alive. Toxin, now it's poisoning you. And so one of the things that we look for all the time is what Dr. Rob has coined stealth infections. Stealth meaning you don't know you have it, you don't have a fever, you don't feel like you're coming down with something, but you have some sort of a bacteria or virus or parasite or amoeba or protozoa or fungus or candida, something in your body that does not belong there that you don't know that you have.
Yeah, and you have to understand, right? So we're 37 to 50 trillion cells, depending which research article you're going to read. And you have about 10 times more bacteria in your body than that. So we are literally, I'm a bag of skin, some Rob DeMartino cells, and then just a whole bunch of bacteria that's living around there. And everything has to live in unison. And if they can live in unison, these bacteria, even though we tend to think bacteria is always something bad, has this very beneficial effect for us, right? People think about, people know like good bacteria in your stomach, right? It helps you digest food. Right. It does so much more than that on a biophysics level. But the idea that these bacteria always are looking to turn against you, that your immune system is always fighting them is not necessarily the case. But if things in your system aren't working right, if your immune system is compromised, if your body is very acidic, different things can happen, basically that the energy levels drop, where now these infections, it's kind of like kids, right? If you give them an inch, they'll go all the way, and they'll start to go a little bit against you, and then it becomes a turf war, right? You said like they like the body a certain way, and and we like the body a certain way that's good for us, and now there's this little battle of what's good for their survival versus what's good for ours.
Yeah, and one thing I don't think the public realizes, and Doc, you've talked about this at a lot of your seminars, is the bugs and bacteria have been getting smarter and stronger and more resistant since the overuse of antibiotics for the last 70 years. And our immune system has been getting weaker and less able to protect us. And so to Dr. Rob and I, it's like watching two trains come together on the same track. Like this is starting to come to a head now. And we see patients so often that are just riddled with these different critters in their body that they don't know is part of what's making them sick with either autoimmune or chronic fatigue or so many other kind of conditions.
And you're 100% right with the ideology of, I made the comment that we're mostly bacteria, but so much of this goes bad. They're not looking to go bad. They're not actively against us. They're not waiting for those opportunities, but it's typically the use of antibiotics that creates this storm and this cycle that typically starts happening. And when you go back and you think over the course of your lifetime of how many times most people end up taking antibiotics, most people get their first round of antibiotics the second they're born, right? Yeah. Right after they're born, they're going to get their jabs, and then they're going to get their bacterial cream in their eyes, right? So that's going to wipe out or change the function of so much of this bacteria, let alone all the different infectious stuff that we're giving out antibiotics for. And I think you said it in maybe 2 episodes ago, talking about just how much antibiotics that they use in our food source.
Yeah, it's 80%.
Right.
Right. So if you add up all the antibiotics that any doctor has prescribed and you put it in a pile, it would be bigger than this building I'm in. That would be a huge pile. Every antibiotic prescription in the world in a pile. Now, that's 20%. The other 80% goes into agriculture and farming and food supply. So that, if you've eaten food, you are still taking in antibiotics. And sometimes patients will go, well, doc, I don't take antibiotics. Well, have you eaten today? Because you've probably taken some in.
Yeah, and they did a study which was really gross, but they found when they looked at meat bought in an average supermarket, almost 50% of it was infected with MRSA. And MRSA, if you don't know, is MRSA is medication-resistant form of staph, a staph infection that's particularly nasty. And MRSA is incredibly dangerous, kills a lot of Americans on a year-by-year basis. So, and when you think like 50% of it, and now you're ingesting that. So essentially, it's like eating something that's poisoned, right? You know, we talk about food poisoning, and you may not get violently ill from that moment, but those infection things will go into your system and start wreaking all kinds of havoc. So much so that a number of years ago, a lot of the big companies, they started to put certain antibiotics on the side because they're saying, well, we're going to need that because we're going to have so many different strains of infectious stuff because of especially what they use in agriculture, that we're going to need this because it's becoming a huger and huger part of the healthcare budget.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we talk about stealth infections, these are things that stay in your body long term. You know, if you've ever had chicken pox, you have a virus that lives in your body. If you've ever had a cold sore, you have a virus that stays in your body. You know, even the shingles commercial says shingles lives in your body forever. And you have all of these viruses, bacterias, molds, funguses, all these things that you're harboring. And it's not so much that, it's all the debris, all the trash that's left over. You know, a way I explain biotoxin to my patients, and I think it really helps them understand this, is if I caught the flu today, I wouldn't really know it for 3 days. And I would have the full-blown flu infection growing in my body. That's not what makes you feel sick. When my immune system starts to kill that flu, and that flu starts to kill my cells, all of that debris that's left over is called biotoxins. Then I start to feel achy and fluish and fatigued and I don't want to get out of bed. But if you have biotoxic load, that's your everyday. That's how you feel all the time. And so looking for these biotoxins in patients is something that's a big part, or it should be a big part of any functional wellness plan, and it definitely is of ours.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing too, because a lot of times we deal with autoimmune patients, they have this perspective that their immune system is overactive, and but the good news, doc, is I never get sick from it. But the reality of it is that their immune system is underactive, right? So they're thinking they never get infections, or if they do get them, their body kills them very quickly. But it's actually the polar opposite of that. They're not mounting any kind of immune system response. So they're not fighting back. So like you said, you only feel sick once your immune system said, okay, this has gone far enough and now we're going to fight. That's what makes you feel sick. You know, the fever, the body aches, all that stuff is your immune system reacting. And then, like you said, the debris on the other side of it. And then, you know, once the infection is handled, the next day you don't have those same symptoms, but you feel like you've been run over by a truck, right? Because you're exhausted because your immune system takes a lot of energy to ultimately do that. But And so many things that we tell people is over the years is just so wrong, right? Like, you know, it's, you know, oh my God, I have a fever. The first thing we tell people to do is what? Lower your fever, get it down, take all the medication to get your fevers down. I mean, fever is the reason that we cook meat, right? You don't eat raw meat or you don't eat raw fish, right? You don't eat it raw because there will be infectious stuff in it that you kill, you denature with heat. So that's the first thing your immune system does. So if all of a sudden the first thing you do in your line of defense, you take out by taking medications, it's like letting the drawbridge down, right? Like you've let your first line of defense go, and now you're just going to have to deal with it on a much bigger level. So simple concepts like that are so big. But there's really very fundamental differences between the way your immune system works and the way antibiotics work, obviously.
Right, right. And that line of thinking is really ingrained in the American population from birth. Oh, baby, you have a fever. Take this. It'll make you feel better. Oh, you have 101 fever. The commercial said to give you children's Tylenol or I'm a bad mom. And so we are literally born with this brainwashing idea of I have a fever. I feel bad. I need to take something to feel better.
And look, I'm not saying it's comfortable. When anyone's ever had a fever, it's not comfortable. So I understand it. But the discomfort of it actually shortens the amount of time that you're sick. Like people always say, like, wow, that's really lingered for a long period of time. And I'm like, well, part of it was because of what you did, right? And now you didn't know better.
Right.
It's no fault.
Right.
It's not guilting, but it just didn't know better. So it's funny because then later on, my autoimmune patients are like, hey, doc, like, I got sick. Like, I got a fever. I got that stuff. And they get all excited because now they're like, does that mean my immune system's actually starting to work? It's like, yeah. And then eventually, when we go through treatment, a lot of times we do run into infectious-y stuff because now as their body gets stronger, the immune system comes on. It's not that they got exposed to something. Like you said, those little guys have been in there having themselves a time. Basically, they're like squatters. But your system's like, look, I'm too tired to deal with you. But now all of a sudden, the immune system gets stronger, and it's like, okay, now you got to get out. And now there's a battle, right? But this is good. It's got to get out. It's got to clean. But you have to make sure that the body is built up enough to do that. Where docs get in trouble is they just start trying to kill everything. And everyone's exhausted. Their body's energetically in debt. They can't handle the biotoxic load. And they start killing stuff. And you make a huge mess that your body doesn't have the energy to clean up. And then that's where people are like, oh, I had this die-off reaction. And then I guess an American mindset were like, I felt like crap. And it must have been the greatest thing ever. Because more is better. It's like, no, you did it out of order, right? You weren't ready energetically for that. And now you made a big mess. And whether or not your body can clean it up is the issue.
Yeah, and we're getting stranger and stranger stuff. I found 2 months ago, I was looking at a patient and I did his GI mapping, and I found 2 very rare amoebas that are only found in South America in his gut. He had never been to South America. And so I'm in Louisiana. So how he got 2 South American amoebas in his gut in Louisiana and he had never been there, we still haven't figured out. But anyway, we're killing them. They're on their way out. But it is true that you don't necessarily want to just start killing stuff right away. Patients ask me that sometimes too. They come in, they're like, okay, well, when can I do my parasite detox, or when can I start killing off these bacteria? Hold on, we got to get your energy system working, your immune system. You got to be ready to process that, or you'll feel really bad.
Yeah, and it became this whole thing like, well, just use binders. If you kill it, you can just use binders. And frankly, it's not enough, right? It's not enough. Yeah. Binders aren't necessarily the worst ideology in the world in conjunction with building up the energy system. But if somebody is going to create a system where they're not able to reduce their inflammation inside their body, you could set off a storm. You could set off a storm of trouble in there too. And most of the time when you see those biotoxic illness patients, they got there by collapsing those systems. So they're already in that, and then you go, and I get it. I mean, like, I don't want that thing in there. Get it the hell out of me. Like there's that panic.
Especially parasites.
Right, yeah.
Want those out like now.
I don't like the idea of this, like, get it out. I'm like, I get that, and we don't want it there either, but at a certain point, like that will come into play very much so, but your system has to be strong. And, they always use the analogies of, like, if you think of the fishbowl and the water's filthy, do you medicate the fish because he's sick, or do you clean the water first? Right? If you clean the water, believe you me, there's a lot less you have to do with the actual fish. Right? But if the water stays dirty and you keep medicating the fish, you're going to play that game forever. But you may still have to do some things. But it's all about powering up the system so that your system is strong enough so that it'll handle those infections a lot of the ways for you, or at least do the cleanup. Otherwise, you will make a biotoxic mess, and those patients will get sick, and they can spiral on you real fast if you're not careful.
Yeah, and for those listening, one of the things that really hit home for me in Dr. Rob's seminar when we talked about this is we talk about the internal terrain of the body. Like, how healthy is your terrain? Not, I have this, I need to kill it. Well, let's make the terrain right first. And one of the analogies I really love is that the rats don't draw the trash dump. the trash dump draws the rats. And so if you clean up the dump, you don't have rats. And when we work on this terrain theory that Dr. Rob talks about, that's what it's all about. Like, how do we get the internal body healthy enough? Because if you don't work on the terrain and you do kill something, you're just going to get something else, because we're all exposed to all kinds of stuff every single day. And so you've got to do this in the right order. It's not only what we do, it's the order that we do it in makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that analogy was Dr. Fred Barge, who was one of my mentors. Rest in peace, God rest his soul. But yeah, it's 100% true, because order really matters, right? And there's such a huge difference the way your immune system does this, right? So if there's a bacteria floating around your system, say something you ate or however that works, what'll happen is the white blood cells, they think of them like your police, right? Like they're patrolling, looking for bad guys doing bad things, right? And it'll find it, and it will basically swallow it whole and gobble it all up. So there is very little debris that's left. But antibiotics don't do that. Antibiotics come in like a heat-seeking missile and basically hit it and cause it to explode. So it'd basically be like me having a glass and saying, I don't want this anymore, and smashing it on the ground, then realizing I overreacted, and then I go and I pick up all the little shards. Well, the antibiotic comes in, smashes the glass. Now your immune system goes to pick up the shards, but maybe there's little fine pieces of glass that get embedded in your carpet that you just can't see. And now we have remnants and pieces of bacteria that will trigger an immune response, but they don't show up on testing. Because in the United States, the concept of that is what they call cell wall deficient bacteria. And there is no lab in the United States that will actually test for cell wall deficient bacteria. Because in the US, in order for something to be able to be considered an infection, it has to be able to be cultured. So they have to stick that Q-tip into your throat, they rub it on the Petri dish, they put it away, they put the Petri dish, and then they call you later like, oh, you have strep or whatever. Bacteria that loses its cell wall because it's been destroyed doesn't culture. So it's not considered an infection in the United States. So fragments of bacteria, not even whole pieces, caused by all this antibiotic damage, it's a huge European concept, and there's ways of dealing with it. But in the US, the concept of that does not exist, because it goes against our postulates of how we define infections. Because it's all antibiotic and medication driven.
Yeah, I think you studied that with the Germans, right?
Yep, German docs.
I remember you talking about that. And so the difference is the way our immune system would kill a bacteria is like putting that glass vase in a garbage bag and then breaking it. So you contain all of the debris. Mm-hmm. The way antibiotics do it is just smash the vase on the floor.
Yeah,
and you get debris shatters everywhere.
And hope you can clean it up the right way, right, which is not typically how it works. Fragments will get lost.
Yeah. Now, one of the huge sources of biotoxic illness, and Doc touched on this earlier, is mold. And so he lives in Las Vegas, where humidity is basically zero.
Yeah. If it goes over 10, we're upset.
Yeah. I think it's 60 right now, 60% humidity in Louisiana, and we're not even in summer yet.
Yeah.
And so we live in one of the highest mold states in the United States. And you know, nationwide, like 50% of the homes have mold in them. In Louisiana, it has to be 80 or more percentage of homes here that have had hurricane damage, flooded buildings. I mean, we are about 2 feet below sea level. I could dig a hole in my yard and it fills up with water. So that's where our water table is at. And so huge mold toxicity problem, and that creates a huge biotoxin problem.
Yeah. And even in dry climates here, they say it's 50% in the desert. Right? So it's not humidity, it's hot as anything, and we still get it all the time, because you have to imagine the way that homes are built. They're basically built like petri dishes, right? If you go behind your drywall, right, there's plastic, there's the insulation, there's all of those things that are going to basically trap all of that. And, you know, there's obviously pipes, and if they leak and you start getting water or stuff in there, it's easy enough to get that mold to build, and then you're breathing it in, and those things start triggering massive inflammatory reactions inside your body, right? So the killer with them is they trigger a mass amount of inflammation that affects your brain in very specific ways that will trigger a cascade of immune system disorders. So there's a group, you go on the internet, there's a group of people that believe that like multiple sclerosis doesn't exist, because they say, oh, it's all Lyme disease. Oh, it's all biotoxic illness. And the reason, obviously it does exist, and the reason why they both look so similar is they trigger a very similar cascade. So the inflammatory process for different triggering reasons happens almost the same way. It affects the brain in the same part and causes the same cascade. That's where the confusion is, where they think it's always the same thing, where it's not. But at the end of the day, the ideology of that basically everything is built like a petri dish is part of the causation. And it's no different when we talk about culturing, right? Petri dishes have requirements. When we're kids, you have a teenager, right? So like they make them do those things at school where they like, swab the toilet and make them rub it on the thing and see what bacteria grows, right? Everything is filthy, right? Like everything has, your phones are disgusting. Money is like, cash money is disgusting, right? So it's like this idea of like, oh, we can't touch any of these. There's bacteria everywhere. If you could see it, how much you're breathing in, it would be like really upsetting and shocking. But think about a petri dish. It has to have that red agar. That's sugar. That's acid. Yeah. So you have to be in an acidic environment. Then do they leave it open? No, they seal it super tight so no oxygen can get delivered to it. And then do they leave it in the sun? No, they put it in the darkest recesses of anything that they can find. And that's how it cultures. So what does that mean on the other end? If you're not acidic and not sugar-ridden, if you have a lot of good oxygen usage, which most people don't have, we see that on testing all the time. They can breathe the oxygen, they just don't use it well. That's a major thing with POTS. We've talked about that in the past webinars.
Yeah.
And then you've got no sunlight or alien forms of sunlight. Well, guess what? You're a petri dish. You add EMF into it, right? And EMF makes fungus grow about 12 times the rate.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so electromagnetic field, if you put fungal or mold around it, it will grow at 12 times its normal rate. So don't sleep on the fact that this is, again, another perfect situation where all these things are happening. And we're the petri dish, and you've got to be doing things to make sure that your petri dish is not going to grow abnormal things.
Clean the terrain.
Clean the terrain.
And the other problem with homes is they're so sealed up these days because of the electric bill. They try to seal every window at every door, so there's no air exchange, and so they're creating that low oxygen, sealed up, moist environment for mold to grow. Now, there is a genetic marker, I believe it's called HLA-DR, and about 20% to 25% of the people have this marker, I believe. And the way that works is, the way I understand it, Doc, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you're around mold, it will turn that genetic marker on, and removing yourself from the moldy environment doesn't turn it off. So it's not like being allergic to a cat, where you go into a house where there's a cat and you start sneezing. Well, when you leave, that goes away. But with this HLA-DR gene, removing yourself from the mold doesn't necessarily turn it off. So you may have had a flooded house 4 years ago and have been sick ever since and just aren't connecting the two. Did I say that right?
Yeah, pretty much. So it's about 24% of the population carries this gene. And it can, now the reality of this, it could be on before you even get exposed to the mold, right? So whatever triggers it, there's certain reasons inside the body why it'll happen. We'll save that story for another time. But there's reasons why this genetic will get turned on. And then if you get exposed, basically what it forces your body to do, it makes your body not very good at getting those biotoxins out. So you're basically just keeping recycling that own junk over and over and over again. So I could live in the house and we could live in the house together, and you probably, and I have that gene and you don't, so you'd probably not feel great while you're there. Maybe you have runny nose and some allergic-y type of symptoms. I would get pretty sick. And then when we leave, you would be fine and I would stay sick forever. And you see that a lot of times in Lyme disease as well, too, because like some famous people will come out and say, I have Lyme disease, and then you'll see the comments and people be like, just take some antibiotics and get over it. Yeah, if you don't have that genetic. If you have that genetic, that's not going to do anything. Actually, that makes it worse. So, so why do some people take an antibiotic and get over it? Why do some people take an antibiotic and stay sick forever? It really matters those genes. So we have to be cognizant of that. And that, I can't tell you how many times I've sat with people who got exposed, and they're like, but why is my husband not sick? Yeah. Like, he's fine now, and I'm still, like, deathly ill. And it's like, well, there are these genetic markers. So the idea is getting that fixed and making sure then those genetics are fixed so that if you do get another exposure, you don't have an explosion.
Yeah, I've seen that before. The spouse is going, it's not the house or I'd be sick too, pipe down. And the woman is going, it has to be, it has to be. And the spouse is like, no, it can't be. I feel fine and you're sick. It has to be something else. But it's actually just one has the gene and one doesn't.
That's all it is. Yeah, and you run into it. And we've run into mold in all kinds of weird places, right? You know, that one patient, I was like, it's got to be somewhere. It's got to be somewhere. And then one day she called me. She's like, we were about to go on vacation, and I was about to pack up my coffee maker, and I opened it up, and the thing is loaded with mold. She's like, so every morning when I'm having a cup of coffee, I'm basically drinking, and coffee is actually very moldy if you get not great coffee. Like coffee is actually high in mold just as a food or a beverage. But her coffee maker was loaded with mold, and once we got that out of play, then there was no more exposure to it. But it gets around. I've found in people's cars. You find that in those electric toothbrushes will get really moldy on the inside, and people be sticking. You know, so it does show up in lots of unusual places.
Well, a perfect example of that. I was talking to a mold patient, just this morning, who a biotoxic case, and she looked all over and couldn't figure it out. Well, she has a farm. Animal feed, sacks of animal feed, like you open to give to a horse, is loaded with mycotoxins. And so that's where she was getting her mold from. Now, we still got to test all that out because that was just this morning. But I would be willing to bet that's where her mold toxicity is coming from, is she opens those sacks for her horses, you know, every day, and she breathes the dust coming out of there. And that's a very big source of mold.
Yeah, it can, you know, we always think it's going to be like some huge thing. And I had one patient and she had seizures, and when we told her like, hey, I think you have some sort of sign of mold exposure here, she's like, oh no, I know what that is. It was like one of the places she worked at, they literally had mushrooms growing out of the wall. And I was like, well, I guess we don't have to search that out. Like, that's the answer for what it is. And it was a food establishment. I'll just leave it at that. They've since closed down, thankfully, for everyone else. Right. But getting her out of that was a really important step in recovery, because, I mean, obviously that you're not going to do well in an area like that. But it's amazing how many places it does show up, and it doesn't always really become that painfully obvious. Right, but it can get extreme. I mean, I've had patients move out of their house. I had one patient, she left her house in Florida with just the clothes on her back, left everything there because everything was covered in mold, shaved her head, literally shaved her head to get it out of her hair. I mean, that's how sick she was, because it just doesn't get enough credit, because the havoc that it wreaks on the hormones that control your brain, your immune system, your nervous system, all the different functions, your mitochondrial function in your body, is going to get directly wrecked by that system. And if you're not looking at that, I've been to lots of biotoxic courses, and I'm always amazed at how they mention those hormones kind of as like a quick aside, and then they like, it's in their testing, but they don't really look at them or do anything with them. And I'm like, that's the thing I care the most about, because if you fix that, the rest of it gets actually much more straightforward. I wouldn't say easy, but much more straightforward.
Yeah. And for those of you out there listening that may feel like you have this is a complicated process to get rid of out of your body. You know, you can't go to Costco and buy a little box of milk thistle that says cleanse on it and fix yourself with this. Yeah. And you can either do absolutely nothing and waste your money, or you can make yourself really sick. Yeah. This is a process that takes expertise and experience and data and really figuring this out for you. And so this is not an easy thing to do. I mean, this takes, you know, even just with our program, this takes time, and you have to be delicate with it, and you have to go at the right pace with the right, you know, order. And so it's a complicated process.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, you know, sometimes people are like, I've tried everything. And yeah, but just doing general healthy things for yourself isn't going to move this, because you will get stuck in really high leverage points. And like you said, order really matters. So, you know, some people are like, well, I was sick, but then I did these general healthy things, you know, and I got better. It doesn't really do that necessarily with mold. Like I said, there's really major places, and you've got to be really, really, really detailed, really systematic with it, very specific with it. And I know those patients usually feel like they have tried absolutely everything underneath the sun. They'll come in frustrated. They've tried all kinds of different things. And they're usually very knowledgeable, because unfortunately the burden of understanding usually falls on them at the internet. And then we'll come in and they'll start asking real specific questions like, hey, do you know what this number is? And they're like, no, what is that? I'm like, you know what this number is? No, what is that? You know, okay, these things matter, right? And I love, we talked about before, I love the fact that they go look. right? I love that fact that they're used to it. But it's tough. Like, it took us a long time to understand, and you know, I wish it was just a pill in a bottle. Make all of our lives a heck of a lot easier, and a lot of people a lot better, a lot quicker.
Yeah. Yeah, that always surprises patients when they'll say, well, I know you don't want me Googling anything. I'm like, who told you that?
Yeah.
Well, my other doctor told me that. No, I want you to go research this.
Yeah.
Because what we're saying actually is real and it's a thing. So we want you to go Google this, but you have to ask us specific questions. But yeah, go do your research. It's weird that a doctor would say, don't go home and research this. Right?
Yeah, isn't that raise a red flag?
Yeah.
We're going to make this investment.
Just
Whatever
take
you
my
do,
word
don't
for
research it.
What is that about,
And it just goes to show you what you're going to find.
Right. You might find an answer. So, Doc, one of the really cool tests for biotoxic load that you introduced me to is visual contrast scale. And if you guys have never heard of that test, we have a device that will put a card a certain distance from your eyes, and there's a series of circles, and there's some lines that you can barely see on there. Some of the lines are straight, some of them go to the left, and some of them go to the right. And we can actually have the patient read how many of those lines, because they get faded as they go down. And there's a scoring that goes with this that will tell us if this patient struggles with biotoxic load. Doc, explain how all this works.
So it goes back to kind of the stuff we talked about before. So the inflammatory reaction that this will trigger inside the body will affect the way your optic nerve sees shading. So it may not necessarily affect your vision, your 20/20 version of vision, but a lot of times people will notice that they don't see as well as night as it starts to get more grayscale. But it will affect the way that we see shading. So it's a really easy, non-invasive test, and it's actually 92% accurate for people. So it's a very high accuracy test, but it's a functional test. It lets me know, do I need to go down this pathway and check this out for them? Because if they fail that, it means the function's being impeded. And then I have to go search out why that's actually, what's driving that to have happen. Because at the same time, when we do find what's causing it, and you want to get rid of all of that and get all of that restored, you want to make sure the numbers look nice on paper, but the function is also restored. So it's a very cool test because it allows us to check function that we can then back up with some chemistry and then say, okay, now this is better, and when both of those are better, we know the person's going to stay better. And those hormonal pathways aren't going to get screwed up. But it's a very powerful, very simple tool that has a very high level of accuracy, though. 92% is nothing to sneeze at, especially when it comes to medical testing. And they describe it as a non-specific neurological test. But really what it's measuring is the inflammatory load that those biotoxins that will create and how it affects your optic nerve. And your eyes are a big window into what's happening with your brain.
It's really cool, too, because when you start talking to patients about it, they're like, yes, I went to the eye doctor twice and he told me my prescription was fine, but I cannot see. Sometimes my eyes do weird things. I can't see certain things, but it's not my vision. This is not a vision test. It's testing for contrast or shading. And if you can't see these certain lines on this paper and you score bad on it, we know that it's not a visual problem, it's a biotoxic load problem. And then we can go down that pathway of, okay, now where's it coming from? Where's it at in the body? What do we need to do about it? When do we need to do it? All those questions that keep Doc and I up all night every night, trying to figure this out for you guys.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's and sometimes they know they have this, that's why they're here. They say, look, we're going to do this test. You're going to fail, right? So just heads up, don't beat yourself up over it. And the only reason I'm doing it is to not make you feel bad about yourself. I'm just trying to get a grading score, right? Because if you fail, you get 10%, and then the next time we get 30%, hey, it's a 20%. We're going to use this to mark and measure your improvement. Now, if we didn't know you had that, we would go looking for it. I mean, I had one woman and she was going, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, the lines. Like, so you just tell me which way the lines are going. And she's going, I don't know what you're saying. Her husband's in the room going, the lines, they're up and down or this way. And I'm like, she can't see it. Even if it was right up in her face, she couldn't see it. When we did a retest, she's like, the lines. I see the lines now. So, I mean, she got a 0 on that test. And then she could see them. And it was really funny coming to that realization. I'm like, man, she's so biotoxic. And she had MS, funny enough. I mean, that was it. But she had so much biotoxic load that it was just overwhelming the entire ability.
Yeah. Yeah, I had one arguing with me that there were no lines there the other day. Like, no, there's no lines on here. There are. You'll see it eventually. We'll
promise
get you
there
there.
are. I
We'll
promise
get you
there
there.
are.
Just hang in there. Right now, you're a 0.
Yes.
Right?
Keep
But
this
we'll-
card.
we'll
I
get
promise you
there.
they'll be on there.
Right. And so, guys, this biotoxic problem is a real significant problem. And so if you've been sick and no one's been able to figure it out, and you've had lab tests, you've been to specialists, you've been all over, and no one has been able to really understand that. Maybe you've been diagnosed with some wastebasket diagnosis like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome or something like that. But this could actually be the problem all along.
Yeah, or a like symptoms, right? Like it's Parkinsonian-like disease or MS-like disease. When they hit you with that like at the end of it, you start looking for biotoxic load.
Biotoxic load, for sure. Yeah, this is so common in like our Lyme patients, our MS patients, our autoimmune patients, our chronic fatigue patients, fibro. All of those things really sort of make our ears perk up for, man, we need to check biotoxic load. What is the terrain of the body? Do they have a terrain problem? Do they have something in their body that's not supposed to be there, like a parasite or an amoeba or a virus or a fungus or something like that?
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be there.
It's not to make you afraid of the infection, because at the end of the day, the infection means nothing. And it's not even that your immune system is constantly killing these infections. Your immune system is not 24/7 at war. It's all about the health of the system, right? Think of it like a pool. A filter that's not running, that pool doesn't stay blue for very long, right? It gets green and kind of funky really, really quickly. That's what matters, right? So I don't want everyone on this to be like, oh my God, I'm fearful of everything. I don't want to breathe the air. I don't want to touch money. I don't want to, touch my phone.
Yeah.
It's not the bacteria. It's not what makes us sick. It can get you stuck once your system falls behind, and then Dr. Kevin and I have to deal with that as we're starting to try to get you better because it becomes a roadblock. But it's not what causes it. If you keep the system energetically strong, this becomes a nothing burger. But if it's there, I promise you it'll be a big problem.
Yeah. Man, this was a good one today, Doc. Fascinating stuff. I'm very interested in. I like working on biotox stuff. It's one of those things that just I'm really interested in it, and it seems like there's more and more things creating biotoxic load all the time. I mean, we keep coming up with more and more critters and bugs and bacteria, and they keep getting worse and they keep mutating. I mean, I don't think this problem's going away.
No, and of course, there's certain bacteria, there's certain algae that'll do it, there's certain parasites. We talked about mold, fungus, we talked about Lyme. But interestingly, there was never a virus that created biotoxic load until COVID.
Ah, yes.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. That has to be made from a bat somewhere. Right?
Yeah, definitely. Bunch of freaky bat
We'll
stuff
close it out.
happening.
We'll close it out before we get into conspiracy theories that aren't.
We'll be banned
conspiracy
before we know it.
Yeah, we don't want to get banned. Well, listen, thank you guys so much for joining us on Road to Great Health number 14. We will be back next week for number 15. Dr. Rob, I appreciate you, man. I'm having a blast. We'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Take care.